Chapter 6: Expanding Beyond Jobra into Tangail. In the fall of 1977, on the first anniversary of our rural banking experiment, I joined my family in Chittagong for the holy festival of Eid ul-Fitr, which celebrates the end of the month-long fast of Ramadan. Though Eid ul-Fitr is a 3-day holiday, like most Bengali families we take a week to celebrate it, my mother and father, both extremely religious, instilled a deep respect for tradition in their children. My father spends the entire Ramadan paying the religious tax zakat required by the Quran. As prescribed by Sharia law, he gives first to family relatives who are in need, then to poor neighbors, and finally to the poor at large. Eid ul-Fitr is our opportunity to gather together relatives and reflect on the year that has elapsed. In 1977, we congregated at Nirivili, the house my father built in 1959 in the then new Pachalaish residential area of Chittagong. Nirivili means peace and quiet. The house rises behind a protective garden wall surrounded by a ring of lush green trees: mango, betel, nut, banana, teak, guava, coconut, and grenadine. Nirivili is huge, with its vast verandas and wide open spaces. I have always felt that it resembles a transatlantic steamer. Despite its constructional oddities, the rooms are too big, the hallways too lavish and impractical. I love the place. It is divided into 8 separate apartments which house my brothers, so that my father, who lives on the ground floor, is surrounded by half of his large loving brew. VREW, brew. That is the way he likes it. The house is a source of family strength and unity. On the day of Eid, our family's ritual is fixed according to custom. We rise early and wash. Then we visit Botua, my father's ancestral village, where I was born and where the family spent most of the Second World War. At 7 a.m., the men of the family head for the Idgah, an open field where a large congregation gathers for prayer. We say our namaz prayer, and the imam begins his khutbah sermon. Several thousand people line up behind him. Everyone is dressed in new Eid clothes, and the smell of traditional perfumes fills the open field. After prayer, my brothers and I embraced each other, saying Eid Mubarak, Happy Eid, and line up to touch father's feet as a mark of respect and greeting. After a visit to the cemetery and the payment of the compulsory fitra tax, 1.25 kilos of wheat to the poor, we begin our round of visits to relatives' houses. After our month-long fast, the sweetmeats and delicious noodle dishes taste all the better. Mamtaj, our elder sister, prepares the best sweets of all. This year she has made my favorites: creamy rosmalai with tiny white poppy seeds and a rich mango pulp mixed into kheer, 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 a sort of thick evaporated milk. I savor her yogurt and chira, delicious rice flakes complemented by sweet mangoes and bananas. Momtaz is 12 years older than I. She has an oval face with warm dark eyes. Though she married and left the house at 17, She always made it her business to oversee her siblings as if she were a substitute mother. This Eid Fitr of 1977, children were all around us, calling out to each other, laughing, eating, and playing. But Momtaz quietly took my hands in hers. How good she is! How caring and loving she has been to me, to all of us. As I look into her eyes, I recall the day in 1950 when I raced by bus and rickshaw all the way to her house to announce the birth of my brother Ayub. How out of breath I was. How excited at then. She laughed and embraced me and called her neighbors to tell them the good news. We ate and celebrated long into the night, and the next day Momtaz packed her bag and moved into our house to help mother take care of little Ayub. So much time had passed since then. Looking around the room at my sisters Momtaz and Tunu and my brothers Salam, Ibrahim, Jahangir, Ayub, Azam, and Moinu, I thanked God for our health and happiness. How lucky we were! In October 1977, on a trip to the capital city of Dhaka, I had a chance meeting that radically changed our efforts to bring credit to the poor villagers of Jobra. For personal reasons that had nothing to do with Grameen, I was in the offices of one of our largest national banks, the Bangladesh Krishi Agriculture Bank BKV, where I bumped into an acquaintance of mine, the managing director. As soon as he saw me, Mr. A.M. Anisuzzaman, an extremely talkative and outgoing man, launched into a tirade, 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 a long monologue attacking me and other academics who were not doing enough for Bangladesh but hiding away in our ivory towers. It was a blistering attack. You academics are failing us. You are failing in your social duties. And the banking system of this country stinks. It is all corruption and embezzlement and filth. Millions of taka are stolen every year from the BKV bank without any trace. No one is accountable to anyone for anything. Certainly not you, Lily White, handed academics with your cushy jobs and your jaunts abroad. You are useless, all of you. Utterly useless. I am absolutely disgusted by what I see in this society. No one thinks of the poor. I tell you, this country is a disgrace, and it deserves all the problems it has. And Suzaman went on and on. When at last he began to slow down, I said, "Well, sir, I am happy to hear you say all this because I just happen to have a proposal that may interest you." I proceeded to outline my Jovra experiment, explaining that my students were volunteering on an unsalaried basis. They donate their time, and I use the budget for my practical training to pay for expenses. The loans are being repaid, and the situation of our borrowers is improving by the day, but I do worry about my students. They need to be compensated, even in a small way, for doing this work. The entire experiment is held together only by a thread. It needs institutional support. Anisuzzaman listened carefully to my story. As I spoke, I saw him drawn to my idea. He was getting excited. "What problems have you had with the Janota Bank?" he asked. "They insist that I guarantee each and every loan. I will be in America for 3 months attending UN General Assembly sessions, and they will insist on mailing the loan documents for me to sign. You can imagine how impractical that is." He shook his head. "Tell me what I can do to help you." I was delighted. I could have gone on for years and years and never have run across such an eager supporter. I explained. The Janota Bank can't raise objections to our program because there has been no loan default. But it takes them anywhere from 2 to 6 months to process each new loan. Every single one has to be sanctioned by the head office in Dhaka, and every time they have a question, it takes a few more months to go up the chain of command and come back again. It is difficult to operate like this. Anisuzzaman waved his hands impatiently. You can't go on like this. It is absurd. Now tell me what you would want from me. From the Krishi Bank? Yes. Well, my mind was racing, I guess. I would like the Agriculture Bank to set up a branch in Jobra and leave it at my disposal. I would frame its rules and procedures and recruit my own staff. And you would allow me to grant loans up to a total of 1 million taka. Give me a 1 million taka limit, give me 1 year, then close the lid, close the lid and let me go to work. A year later, open the lid and see if I am still alive. If you like just one thing I have done, extend the program. If not, simply close down the branch and forget about it. Use me as an experiment. If no one repays any of our loans, then at most you have lost 1 million taka. Fine, said Anisuzzaman. He picked up the telephone and said to his secretary, Get me the manager of the Chittagong district. He covered the receiver and asked, When are you going back to Chittagong? Tomorrow. By the afternoon plane? Yes. Another voice sounded on the line and Anisuzzaman said, My friend, Professor Yunus, is flying back from Dhaka tomorrow. He will arrive at the university campus at 5 p.m. I want you to be waiting for him at his residence, and I want you to take orders from him. Whatever he says, whatever he wants, those are orders from me. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Have you any questions? Anisuzzaman said into the telephone, No, sir. Perfect. Now, I don't want to hear anything going wrong. I don't want Professor Yunus complaining to my office that his orders are not being followed. Do you understand? As I came out of Anisuzzaman's office, my head is still swimming. I saw a girl sweeping the street outside. She was extremely thin, barefoot, and wore a ring in her nose. Like the thousands of cleaners in Dhaka's streets, this woman would work all day long, 7 days a week, and would just barely earn enough to subsist. Yet she was one of the lucky ones, for she had a job. It was for this very woman and for all those women who could not even aspire to a job of a street cleaner that I wanted to develop my credit program. At that moment I knew that I was doing the right thing. The next afternoon, the Chittagong regional manager of the Agriculture Bank was waiting for me in my drawing room. He seemed very nervous. I told him what had happened the day before and how enthusiastically Anisuzzaman had embraced the work my students and I were doing in Jobra. The manager explained that I would need to write a project proposal. He would bring several of his colleagues to my house to draft a formal written request for funding. The following Monday, 5 people showed up at my home. They asked me a million questions. Things I had never thought about. How many borrowers did I want? How many employees? What salary levels would I offer? How many safes would I need? I answered the questions the best I could. A few weeks later, I received a large envelope in the mail. It was a proposal based on what I had told them I wanted to do. A long, complicated, thick tome, 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 full of bureaucratic jargon. Even reading a single page was extremely difficult. It said nothing. I took out a pen and jotted down my original idea in my own words. My proposal was to the point. The first thing I changed was the name of the branch. I wrote, Krishi Bank uses the term agriculture in its title. I do not want this branch to be about agriculture. Farmers are not the poorest people in Bangladesh. On the contrary, those who own farms are relatively well off compared to the destitute landless who make a living by selling labor. I want this branch to cover all sorts of rural employment, such as trading, small manufacturing, retailing, even selling door to door. I want this to be a rural bank, not a bank merely concerned with crops and farms. So I chose the word Grameen, spelled Grameen. Several months went by before I heard from Anisuzzaman. He called me in for a meeting in his office in Dhaka. Once I had seated myself, he lit a cigarette and considered me carefully. My board of directors say that I have no authority to do what I am trying to do, he said. I can't delegate my banking authority to you because you are an outsider, not an employee of the bank. Anisuzzaman paused to frame his question. Yunus, do you really want to open a new branch of our bank? No, not at all. I just want to lend money to the poor, I answered. Do you want to remain a professor? Well, teaching is the only thing I know how to do. It is what I love. I am not pressuring you. I was only thinking out loud. Anisuzzaman leaned his head back and blew smoke up to the ceiling. You could give up your job at the university and simply become an employee of our bank. That would make it easy for me to make you my deputy. I could then delegate any of my powers to you without fear of complaints from the board. Thank you, but I have no real interest in becoming a banker, I answered. I would rather remain a professor. I have a department to run, students and professors to oversee, university politics to contend to it. I am doing this poverty alleviation work with my left hand, as it were. I would far rather name one of my students to be the manager of the branch. Anisuzzaman stared out the window of his office, letting the smoke curl from his cigarette. I could see his mind toying, T-O-Y-I-N-G, toying with various ideas. What if I do not make you responsible for the branch on paper? Officially, the district manager would oversee the branch, but unofficially, he would do everything you tell him. He would take his orders from you, and if there were anything out of the ordinary, he would come to headquarters, and I would approve it. You should submit a list of your students who are currently working for you in Jobra. One of them can become the branch manager, and the others can become regular employees of the bank. I smiled at the thought that my associates, Asad, Nurjahan, and Jannat, would finally have solid, paying jobs for the first time in their lives. I would call it the Grameen branch, I said. Anisuzzaman nodded. The experimental Grameen branch of the Agriculture Bank. How does that sound? Perfect. We were both smiling now. He got up. We stood by the window. Outside, the chaos of the city streamed by. I saw barefoot beggars with babies, women asleep on the sidewalk, children with deformed limbs and emaciated bodies. The urban poor are another problem, Anisuzzaman said with a loud sigh. If we alleviate suffering in the countryside, that will reduce the pressure on the poor to rush to Dhaka and clog the streets, I said. He nodded slowly. Good luck, Professor. I immediately threw myself into my work, still a full-time professor at the university. I devoted much of my day to managing our Jobra branch of the Agriculture Bank, which was still staffed by my ex-students. We could work faster than with the Janota Bank, and I no longer needed to guarantee each loan personally. But we still had fewer than 500 borrowers. Though there were many individual successes, we did not seem to be making much of a dent, D-E-N-T, dent in the chronic poverty of the villages. After a few months, in early 1978, I was invited to preside over a session at a seminar called Financing the Rural Poor, organized by the Central Bank. The seminar was under the aegis, A-E-G-I-S, aegis of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and attended by a group of experts from Ohio State University. These US experts argued that the key to lending to farmers was setting interest rates at a high level. They believed that when threatened with higher interest, farmers would repay more consistently. Really? This made no sense to me, I protested. When farmers in Bangladesh are desperate, they will borrow regardless of what interest they are charged. They will even go to a moneylender who threatens to take over all their possessions. The man in the conference room looked at me uneasily. I would pay farmers a negative interest rate, I explained. I would lend them 100 taka, about $5, and if a farmer returned 90 to me, then I would forgive him the repayment of the 10 taka. You see, the real problem with lending to farmers is getting the principal back, not the interest. I was being intentionally provocative. These policy experts wanted to make credit so difficult that only skilled farmers and artisans would dare to borrow money. I, on the other hand, wanted to make it easier for people so that they would be encouraged to pay back their loans. One elderly banker had little patience for my lecture. Professor Yunus, he began, your Jobra experiment is nothing. Only a fly speck, F-L-Y-S-P-E-C-K. Only a fly speck compared to the big national banks we manage. Our hair has not turned gray for nothing. We have a lot of experience. If you want to prove your point, show us a success over a whole district, not just in a single village. I was not surprised by his challenge. Most bankers did not take me seriously. They glossed over my desire to extend the program and remained entrenched in their belief that it was unworkable on a national level. The deputy governor of the central bank, Mr. Asit Kumar Gangopadhyay, was in the audience listening to this whole discussion. After the meeting, he called me into his office and asked me if I was serious about wanting to extend my experiment. I told him I was. A month later, he invited me to a meeting of all the managing directors of the state-owned banks to discuss my proposal. The directors received me with indulgent and patronizing attitudes. When Gangopadhyay asked them for their support, they said, of course, no problem at all, but it was clearly lip service to please him. In truth, they had deep reservations. They argued that borrowers were repaying their loans simply because I was a highly respected university professor and that microcredit worked in Chittagong because I was a native of that city. I tried to explain that the poor did not go to my university, that none of their families could read and write, and that my academic reputation was meaningless to them. But the directors around the table were not listening. If I was serious about demonstrating that this project was replicable by any other bank, I would resign my professorship, become a banker, and set up a Grameen branch in another district. In the end, I did just that. The University of Chittagong granted me a 2-year leave of absence. On June 6, 1979, before I knew what had happened, I had officially joined the Grameen Bank project in the district of Tangail, a region in Bangladesh, spelled Tangail, Tangail. Tangail was selected because it was close to Dhaka, and it would be easy for them to judge if the program was having any real impact on the villagers. It was agreed that each national bank would make 3 branches available to us. One small bank offered only 1 branch, giving us a total of 19 branches in Tangail, 6 branches in Chittagong, and the agriculture bank branch we had already created in Jobra. Suddenly, Grameen was 25 bank branches strong. Tangail district was in the throes, THROES, in the throes of a warlike situation. Armed gangs, GANGs, armed gangs in an underground Marxist dissident movement called the Gonobahini, the People's Army, terrorized the countryside. These guerrillas killed with little compunction, COMPUNCTION, little compunction. They simply pointed a gun and fired. In every village we came across dead bodies lying in the middle of the road, hanging from trees or shot by a wall. The countryside was awash with arms and ammunition left over from the War of Liberation. To save their lives, most of the local community leaders had run away, hidden with neighbors, or moved into hotels in Tangail city. There was neither law nor order. What could we, a fledgling bank project, achieve in the face of this bloodshed and killing? We worried about the physical safety of our newly recruited branch managers and bank workers who would be working and living by themselves in distant villages. To make matters worse, many of the young workers we were hiring were ex-students with radical sympathies who could easily be swayed by the armed leftist guerrillas. In fact, we later found out that some of our workers had been active Gonobahini members up until they began working for us. It was the hottest part of the year. Even the slightest effort left one completely exhausted. During the day, the roads were deserted and people stood under trees praying for a kalboishaki, a sudden summer storm. The villages we passed through seemed so God-forsaken and the people so poor and emaciated that I knew I had come to the right place. This is where we were needed most. The staff at the banks through which we were supposed to operate resented us for adding to their workload. Countless times they refused to provide services or actively opposed us. Once the situation got so bad that one of our own officers aimed his gun at the manager of a local commercial bank and threatened to kill the man on the spot if he did not make more funds available to Grameen borrowers. We had to fire the officer. The assaulted manager asked to be sent back to Dhaka, and it soured relations with that bank. We did not give up. Rather than depend on the unreliable staff at the national banks, we tried to do as much of our own work as possible. The ex-Gonovadi turned out to be excellent workers. These underground fighters were young, usually between 18 and 20 years old, hardworking and dedicated. They had wanted to liberate the country with guns and revolution, and now they were walking around those same villages extending microloans to the destitute. They just needed a cause to fight for. They just needed a cause to fight for. We channeled their energies towards something more constructive than terrorism. Provided that they gave up their guns, we were happy to hire them as bank workers. At first, I just had a skeleton staff that came up from Jobra with me. My young associates Asad, Dipal, and Sheikh Abdud Dayan. Then later, when it was judged safe, I brought two of the female colleagues who had also worked in Jobra, Nurjahan and Jannat. I moved into a building that was still under construction. I lived in a tiny, unfinished room on the third floor with laborers working all around me. During Ramadan, I broke the daily fast with the traditional light meal of iftar in the evening, pressed rice, cold chira, sweetened with ground coconut and sugar, chickpeas fried with red chilies, slices of mango, and flat discs of fried ground lentils seasoned with green chili and onion. I had no toilet in my office. When I wanted to relieve myself during the day, I had to disturb my neighbors. What kept my spirits up in those first difficult days was the startling generosity of the locals. At night, an old neighbor living under a badly thatched roof would often offer me some pantavat, leftover rice soaked in water, fermented and seasoned with hot fried chilies, raw onions, and leftover vegetables. Unfortunately, Grameen had made it a rule not to accept food or gifts from any borrower or villager. Reluctantly, I refused his offer. Every tiny decision I made had to be reviewed by all the managing directors of all the participating banks at the regular monthly meeting of the Central Bank of Bangladesh in Dhaka. This was a slow and ponderous process. For example, we wasted 2 hours on decision number 37, arguing back and forth about whether to give flashlights to bank workers so they could walk between villages at night. One managing director felt that village life in Bangladesh ought not to be ruined by the importation of flashlights. He wanted our bank workers to use old-fashioned lanterns and kerosene lamps. Like the social anthropologists who continually accuse Grameen of fundamentally altering rural society in Bangladesh, this banker was not willing to allow the introduction of anything that sounded non-traditional. With wealth comes change. But why is this a drawback? I am all for charge. And if that managing director lived in the poorest villages of Tangail and Chittagong, he would be all for it too. In March 1980, I was remarried in a big ceremony in Dhaka. My marriage to Vera had come to an end several years before. Soon after the birth of our daughter Monica in March 1977, Vera determined to leave Bangladesh, saying that it was not a good place to raise a child. Though we still loved each other, we simply could not agree to settle in the same place. Vera refused to stay and I could not abandon Bangladesh. With great sadness, we agreed on a divorce in December. Unlike Vera, who came from a culture so foreign to my own, Afrozi Begum was a Bangladeshi researcher in advanced physics at the University of Manchester. She was as comfortable in the Eastern and Western worlds as I was. For a few months after our wedding, Afrozi remained in England to finish her research while I worked in Tangail. But soon she joined me in Tangail, where we lived on the third floor of our office buildings. Since then, we have already lived close to our office, and even today we live within the office complex. The only difference now is that we have our daughter, Dina Afroch Yunus, who was born on January 24, 1986. By November 1982, Grameen Bank membership had grown to 28,000, of which fewer than half were women. How did we achieve this jump from the 500 Jobra members we had in 1979? There was no one secret to the success of our Tangail expansion, but surely the hard work and dedication of our bank workers and managers was an essential part of it. From those early days, we learned the importance of picking fresh young people to run our branches. Surprisingly, people without previous work experience of any kind are often best suited for this. Previous work experience distracts new workers from the ideals and unique procedures of Grameen. Many young managers embraced Grameen as a great opportunity. They loved the thrill of experiment and adventure. Responsible for setting up the local Grameen branch, the manager chooses the general location of the future office and draws a map of the area. He writes reports on the village's history, culture, economy, and poverty situation. To give Grameen maximum exposure, the manager then invites all the people in nearby villages, including village leaders, religious leaders, teachers, and government officials, to a projection meeting at which a high-ranking Grameen official explains the bank's procedures in detail, giving the villagers the option to either accept Grameen with all its rules and regulations or to reject it, in which case the bank promises to leave the area. So far, no one has ever asked us to leave, but we like to make it clear from the start that the choice to have us is theirs. Working in a bank for the poor is highly specialized work. This is true from the planning and designing level on down to the person-to-person contact in the field. Visitors to Grameen often ask me, what makes a Grameen worker or manager so different from other young people? Why are they so willing to work under such harsh conditions? I believe the answer, in large part, is the training program for bank employees that emerged from the informal weekly review meetings I used to have with our staff in Tangail in the early 1980s. When most people talk about training in the context of an anti-poverty program, they mean teaching poor people new skills. In Grameen, we offer our borrowers little, if any, formal training. Instead, we train our staff, turning them into an elite brigade of poverty fighters. Elite brigade of poverty fighters. Anyone younger than 28 with a master's degree and at least beverage in all final examinations, VERZE beverage in all final examinations is eligible to apply for a job as one of our bank managers. We advertise in the national newspapers and receive a large number of applications. Half of these applicants would make first-class bank managers for Grameen, but since our training facilities are limited, we screen the candidates through interviews to pick only a limited number. Those we select are asked to report to our training institute. Here they receive a 2-day briefing, and then we send them off to various branches where they remain in training for most of the following 6 months. Before they go, the institute staff tells them, observe everything carefully. When your training is over, your task will be to create a Grameen branch of your own that will be better in every respect than the one in which you spent your first 6 months. So trainees discover Grameen for themselves by watching others run one of our branches. We immerse each new young worker in the Grameen culture and the culture of the poor, teaching him or her to appreciate the unexplored potential of the destitute. Our staff training is simple but tough and rigorous. The bulk of it is self-taught. There are no reading materials to go through or computer programs to learn. We find that the villages of Bangladesh teach young people more about life than the pages of any book ever could. During this time, we encourage them to criticize everything they see and come up with proposals for modifications or improvements to any procedures. When they reassemble at our training institute in Dhaka headquarters, that they present their improvement proposals to their colleagues. After their spell in the field, the trainees always bring in a breath of fresh air. They also bring keen observations and sharp criticisms. Often they report that our sacred rules are violated or that our clockwork precision is crumbling down. They come with major plans for overhauling our operations and terrible punishments for those who violate our rules. In the ensuing open debate, the sharpness of these criticisms often gets blunted, but still there are elements of truth in what they report. We encourage these spirited debates, for innovation can only sprout in an atmosphere of tolerance, diversity, and curiosity. Unlike our managers, our bank workers do not have master's degrees. They have only 2 years of college education. If they were to enter the government, they might become junior clerks or office helpers, and they would be at the bottom of the office hierarchy. We receive thousands of applications each year for bank worker positions, but unfortunately, we can only accept about 1 in 10 applicants. We make an effort to hire trainees from a wide variety of economic backgrounds. The overwhelming majority of our job applicants, 85% for men, 97% for women who come to interview with us, have never visited Dhaka before. To raise the money necessary to pay for their interview trip, their parents often sell crops, standing trees, cows, goats, and ornaments. The parents of at least half of our applicants borrow money to finance the trip, many from moneylenders. Over half of our candidates arrive in Dhaka on the same day as their interview, as they do not have friends or relatives to spend the night with, and they cannot afford a hotel or a guest house. Nearly all our applicants are good persons imbued with a strong sense of traditional values. Most of them pray 5 times a day, as expected of a Muslim. The bank is hard work, but those we select appreciate the security, respectability, self-confidence, and opportunity it affords them. Their career prospects after working at Grameen are excellent. Though we pay the salary of an entry-level government worker, we find that privately owned commercial banks that offer much higher wages can rarely entice our workers away from us. What makes our staff so committed? Is it the work itself, their training, the friendships they form, the sense of personal challenge, self-worth, and rectitude? RECTITUD, rectitude they get from helping their country? I suppose that every worker has his or her own reasons. In any case, we encourage our workers to be politically and socially aware, and we trust them to analyze the objective reality and come up with their own conclusions. Above all, we want to build a problem-solving attitude among our workers. We firmly believe that every problem has multiple solutions and that it is our job to select the best one. Unlike other commercial bank workers, our staff members grow to consider themselves teachers. They are teachers in the sense that they help their borrowers to explore their full potential, to discover their strengths, to extend their capabilities further than ever before. I, too, consider myself a teacher. Many of the senior officials at Grameen were my students at Chittagong University, and I'm happy that they consider me more as a teacher than a boss. With a boss, one has to be formal, but with a teacher, the relationship is more informal, even spiritual. One can discuss one's problems and weaknesses more freely. One can admit personal mistakes without fear of triggering an official sanction. Traditional bank officials need their office, their papers, their desk, and their telephone for support. They feel lost without these props. But you can strip everything away from a Grameen employee and still at heart he or she remains a teacher. Here is a typical Grameen bank worker, a composite of the 12,000 worker we now employ and a typical day's work. Name Akhtar Hussain, 1. Name Akhtar Hussain, 2. Age, 27. 3. Monthly salary, 1995, 2,200 taka, $66, including housing allowance, medical subsidy, and commuting allowance. 4. Bonus, 1 month salary paid during each of the 2 Eid's holidays. 6 a.m. Akhtar wakes up, washes prays, eats breakfast. 7 a.m. Akhtar fetches his bicycle, documents and carrying bag from the branch, and pedals to a center. 7:30 a.m. 40 bank borrowers await Akhtar at the center. They are seated in 8 rows, organized according to group. Each group chairperson holds the passbooks of the 5 group members. Akhtar collects the loan repayments and deposits from each group. 9:30 a.m. Akhtar bicycles to another center for his second meeting. During the course of the week, he attends to 10 different centers, meeting with all 400 borrowers he is responsible for and collecting repayments for general loans, seasonal loans, and housing loans as well as saving deposits. 11 a.m. Akhtar visits borrowers at home and offers advice. This is an important way to keep track of his borrowers' needs and problems. Noon, back at the branch office, Akhtar fills out all the reporting forms and enters all the records in his ledger. The branch manager signs off. 1:30 to 2 p.m. Akhtar takes a lunch break with his fellow workers. 2 p.m. Funds collected in the morning are dispersed as new loans in the afternoon. All workers help the branch manager with this task. 3 p.m. Once the loan disbursements are finished, Akhtar and his fellow workers record the new loan information in the ledgers. 4:30 p.m. Akhtar takes a tea break and chats with his fellow workers. 5 to 6:30 p.m. Akhtar visits a center that is experiencing difficulties with loans or organizes an educational outreach program for local children. 7 p.m. Akhtar returns to the office, finishes some paperwork, and retires for the day. During our Tangail expansion, we also developed a procedure for establishing new bank branches. Whenever Grameen opened a branch in a new location, we made a great effort to work slowly and deliberately. No branch would try to reach more than 100 borrowers in its first year of operation. Only once a branch successfully received the full repayment of its first 100 loans was it allowed to speed up operations and recruit more borrowers. Our goal was to liberate the potential of the poor to create better lives for themselves, not to force individuals to do anything they do not want to. Why hurry? Grameen's objective was to develop a system that worked, not to rush out a service that would fail its borrowers. Therefore, we started small. The manager, usually accompanied by an associate manager, who will eventually take over responsibility for setting up his or her own new branch, arrives in an area where Grameen has decided to establish a branch. They arrive without any formal introduction. They have no office, no place to stay, and no one to get in touch with. Their first assignment is to document everything about the area. Why do we provide them with so little orientation? We want them to appear as different as possible from the usual government officials who arrive in the villages with great pomp, P-O-M-P, pomp, expecting delicious meals and comfortable accommodations at the rich villagers' houses. Grameen tries to create a new breed of officials with fresh ideas and modest ways. Therefore, our managers and associates must pay for a room and are not permitted to stay in fancy surroundings. They may find shelter at some abandoned house, school, hostel, or local council office. They must decline offers of food from the well-to-do, explaining that this is against Grameen rules. Every day, the new branch manager and associate manager walk 4 miles to meet with villagers and explain the procedures for forming credit groups and our policy of accepting only the most disadvantaged women who are located the farthest away from the proposed location of the branch. Come rain or shine, they never stop visiting the poor. They are not allowed to take shortcuts by appointing villagers as agents, the usual practice of government officials, and ultimately it is not their words but their hard work that softens the attitude of the villagers. Still, it can be a battle. Often the villagers do not believe these modest visitors are bank officials at all. The local school teachers are usually the first ones to recognize the visitors' educational status, but none of these teachers have ever made it to university. And they find it hard to believe that anyone with a master's degree would ever work in such a miserable village with such poor people, walking several miles every day. Often new managers face skepticism from religious and political leaders in the villages. It was in Tangail that we first encountered large-scale opposition from conservative clerics, clerics, conservative clerics. In numerous cases, these figures tried to scare uneducated villagers by telling them that a woman who takes loans from Grameen is trespassing, T-R-E-S-P-A-S-S-I-N-G, trespassing into an evil area forbidden to women. They warn her that as punishment for joining Grameen, she will not be given a proper Islamic burial when she dies, a terrifying prospect for a woman who has nothing. Other rumors, which can be as frightening to a poor woman as they seem ludicrous to Grameen staff, often surface in the villages. Moharani Das, aged 35, from the coastal region of Potuakhali, was told that contact with Grameen would turn her into a Christian. Her family beat her repeatedly to prevent her from joining. Muhammad Kuti Begum, aged 20, from Faridpur, joined Grameen in spite of being warned that the bank would take her to the Middle East and sell her to a slave trader. Muhammad Manikjan Vivi, aged 35, from Paipara, said, the moneylenders and the rich people told me that if I joined Grameen, I was a bad Muslim and the bank would take me out to sea and drop me to the bottom of the ocean. Manjira Khatun, aged 38, from the Rajshahi district, heard she would be tortured, have a number tattooed on her arm, and be sold into prostitution. Grameen was said to convert women to Christianity, to destroy Islam by taking women out of Porda, to steal houses and property, to kidnap women borrowers, to run away with any repaid loans, and to belong to an international smuggling ring or a new East India company that would recolonize Bangladesh as the British had done 2.5 centuries ago. As soon as such rumors start, and the above list is by no means exhaustive, the situation can become tense very quickly. In one particular village in Tangail, for example, our Grameen manager was physically threatened by a religious leader. When the manager saw there was no way to reason with the mullah, he quietly closed the branch and left the village. He told potential members that his life had been threatened and that they would have to go through orientation meetings in the neighboring village. Some women made the daily trek to the neighboring village to form groups and join Grameen. But others, inspired by the way Grameen had bettered the lives of their neighbors in other villages, visited the religious leader and argued with him. "Why did you threaten that Grameen manager?" they asked. "Grameen was coming here to our village to do nothing but good." "Do you want to go to the hell?" answered the mullah. "Grameen is a Christian organization. It wants to destroy the rules of Purda. That is why it has come." "The Grameen manager is a Muslim and he knows the Quran better than you. Besides, Grameen allows us to work at home, husking rice, weaving mats or making bamboo stools without ever going out. The bank comes to our house. How is that against Purda? The only one who is against Purda here is you, by making us travel miles to a neighboring village to get relief. You are the one who is destroying our lifestyle, not Grameen." "Go to the moneylender. He is a good Muslim," answered the confused mullah. "He charges 10% a week. If you don't want us to borrow from Grameen, then you lend us the money. Leave me alone. I have had enough of your harassing me day and night. I have had enough of your harassing me day and night." "It is you who harasses us by not letting Grameen come here," answered the woman. We will only go when you let Grameen into our village. We will come every day and harass you until you let the bank in." "Oh, okay then, to hell with you all. If you want to damn yourselves into perdition, Perdition, perdition forever, go ahead, join Grameen. I have tried my best to save you. No one can say I didn't try my best to warn you. So go, borrow, and be damned." The women were overjoyed. They rushed in a group to the neighboring village and told the Grameen manager that he could come back now that they had talked to the mullah and that he no longer had any objection. The manager thanked them for their persistence on his behalf but said that he would return only if the man who threatened him came and requested his return. He did not want any misunderstanding or any physical threats hanging over him and his Grameen colleagues. And so the women returned to their village. Again they went and confronted their mullah, mullah, mullah. Again they argued with him until he was so disgusted and tired of the whole matter he wished he had never gotten involved. Finally, at his wits' end, he agreed to invite the manager back into his village. It was not an extremely courteous invitation, but everyone heard it. That was the important part. The women who are the most desperate, who have nothing to eat, who have been abandoned by their husbands and are trying to feed their children by begging, usually stand by their decision to join Grameen Bank no matter who threatens them. They have no other choice. In some cases, they must either borrow from us or watch their children die. And those on the sidelines who watch but dare not ignore the terrible rumors about us soon find out that the Grameen manager's understanding of religious issues is often deeper than that of most of the people who accuse them of being anti-Muslim. We believe that Islam is not at all a hindrance to the eradication of poverty through microcredit programs. Islam does not inherently prevent women from making a living for themselves or from improving their economic situation. In 1994, the advisor on women's affairs to the president of Iran came to visit me in Dhaka. And when I asked her what she thought about Grameen, she said, "There is nothing in Sharia law or the Quran against what you are doing. Why should women be hungry and poor? On the contrary, what you are doing is terrific. You are helping to educate a whole generation of children, and thanks to Grameen loans, women can work at home instead of sitting around." Many Islamic scholars have also told us that the Sharia ban on the charging of interest cannot apply to Grameen, since the Grameen borrower is also an owner of the bank. The purpose of the religious injunction against interest is to protect the poor from usury, usury, but where the poor own their own bank, the interest is in effect paid to the company they own and therefore to themselves. Still, it became a big challenge to train our bank workers to overcome opposition from political and religious leaders without endangering their safety and that of the women they were serving. We tried a variety of techniques, and after a few years we learned that our staff members should quietly go about their business in one tiny corner of the village. If just a handful of desperate women make a leap of faith and join Grameen, everything changes. They get their money, start to earn additional income, and nothing terrible happens to them. Others begin to show interest. We find that borrowing groups form quickly after the initial period of resistance. When the ice finally breaks, women who originally said no to us begin to say, "Why not? I need money too. In fact, I need the money more desperately than those who already joined, and I can make better use of it." Gradually, people come to accept us and opposition dies off. But in every new village, it is a battle to begin. After all these struggles repeated in thousands of villages, it is frustrating to hear people dismiss our accomplishments, arguing that Grameen success is due to cultural factors that cannot be replicated elsewhere. To succeed in Bangladesh, in many ways, we have had to struggle against our culture. In fact, we have had to create a counterculture that values women's economic contribution, rewards hard work, and punishes corrupt practices. Grameen actively discourages the practice of dowry payments and the overly rigid interpretations of Purdah, P-U-R-D-A-H. Indeed, if one were to look for the country where it would be most difficult to have a program like Grameen Bank succeed, I think that Bangladesh would come to the top of the list. And when we see programs modeled on Grameen traveling to the Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, South Africa, and Bolivia, to name a few, it simply reminds us of the tremendous obstacles we have had to overcome in our own country, with its a moribund economy, MORIVUNT, moribund economy, reactionary elites, and frequent natural disasters. Toward the end of 1981, when our 2-year experiment in Tangail was coming to an end, the central bank asked the managing directors of its member commercial banks to give an assessment of Grameen's work. I was puzzled by their reaction, for they chalked chalked Grameen's success up to one factor, the devotion of myself and my staff. They were still convinced that the Grameen concept could not be expanded. "Grameen is not really a bank," said one manager. "Grameen's staff does not sit in offices or keep bankers' hours. They work until midnight day after day and go door to door like Boy Scouts. This is not a model we could replicate. It depends too much on Professor Yunus's personality. We can't have a Yunus in every branch." I was angry. Why should we be penalized for our hard work? Rather than admitting that Grameen had come up with a new banking structure, a new economic concept that could revolutionize the nature of banking, These executives kept trying to pin our success on the individual qualities of myself and my staff. This was the same reaction I had heard 2 years earlier when we were performing our experiment on a tiny scale in Jobra village. But this quibble, Q-U-I-B-V-L-E, quibble masked a greater concern. This quibble masked a greater concern. These commercial bankers preferred to lend large amounts of money to fewer clients. We on the contrary, prided ourselves on our vast numbers of clients. Prided, prided ourselves on our vast number of clients. Our annual report listed hundreds of microloans offered to a plethora of new businesses. Everything from husking rice to making ice cream sticks, trading in brass, BRASS, trading in brass, repairing radios, processing mustard oil, and cultivating jackfruit. I looked around the table at these grave men. Okay, I said, accepting their challenge. Why don't we spread our experiment over a large, spread out area? Choose the poorest, most remote places you can find. Make certain that they are so far apart that I could not possibly be in all those areas at once. I pulled out a sheet of paper and with a pencil I drew up then and there a 5-year expansion plan for the Grameen experiment. I also promised the central bank that it would not cost them a penny. I would mobilize the funds needed to execute the plan elsewhere. Since my days at Chittagong University, one international organization had always come up with support when I asked for it. This was the Ford Foundation. Lincoln Chen, Stephen Biggs, and Bill Fuller, among others, have assisted us with our work. At this particular time, the Foundation was especially interested in our experiment and eager to help us overcome the skepticism of the commercial bankers. Adrian Jarmain, the Foundation's resident representative in Bangladesh at the time, brought in 2 American bankers as consultants to assess our work. Mary Houghton and Ron Graziewinski, both from the South Shore Bank of Chicago, visited us in Dhaka and in the villages. They were very impressed by what they saw. I need a flexible fund, I told Adrian in 1981. I need a fund that I can use to cope with the problems we face in our daily work. I also want to offer a guarantee to the commercial bankers who are supporting us so that they can't back out of the expansion by arguing that it is too risky. With recommendations from Ron and Mary, the Ford Foundation agreed to provide us with $800,000 as a guarantee fund. I assured them we would never need to dip into it. The fact that it is there, I said, I will do the magic. And that is exactly how it worked. We put the funds in a London bank and never withdrew a pound. We also negotiated a loan of $3.4 million from the International Fund for Agricultural Development (IFAD) based in Rome. This amount, matched by a loan from the Bangladesh Central Bank, would be used to expand Grameen's program in 5 districts over the following 3 years. So in 1982, we launched our expansion program to cover 5 widely separated districts: Dhaka in the center of the country, Chittagong in the southeast, Rangpur in the northeast, Patuakhali in the south, and Tangail in the north. By the end of 1981, our cumulative loan disbursement was $13.4 million. During 1982 alone, our disbursements increased by an additional $10.5 million. This is the end of chapter 6. Expanding beyond Jobra into Tangail. Hopefully, you have learned a lot from my reading and from your listening. And thanks for your curiosity to learn more. On the next episode, I will read the next chapter, chapter 7, A Bank for the Poor is Born. But until next time, thanks for your enthusiasm to listen and learn, to grow.